December 2006. The American Midwest was clamped between the knife-edge winds of winter and a slow-burning emptiness inside its people. The small town sat tucked beside an old highway where trucks thundered past, few ever bothering to stop. On the map, it was a faint dot, a name hardly anyone cared to remember. But for the people here, it was the whole world, a world growing poorer, running dry, and waiting for something warm enough to stir it awake. Weathered wooden houses lined both sides of the main street like a row of broken teeth, paint peeled. Window panes were fogged with grime. On the porch's porch, swings kept rocking in the wind like senile elders who had forgotten how to be still. On the road, slick truck oil streaks caught the jaundiced glow of the streetlights. A handful of little shops still forced their doors open, but customers were rare. There was a mechanic's, a ramshackle cafe, and a general store that sold every odd thing. The smells of gasoline, cheap coffee, and damp earth braided together into the pungent, familiar breath of the town. Amid that scene sat an old man every day on a folding chair at the roadside with a small basket of flowers. He didn't sell roses or elegant lilies. His basket held only wildflowers, yellow daisies from the verge, purple morning glories climbing the fence, and sometimes a few nameless sprigs with tiny white blooms. People often wondered who would pay for flowers nobody cared about. Yet the old man kept sitting there day after day in the cold wind, with eyes that seemed to hold a strange light. People called him the roadside flower seller. No one knew his real name, and no one asked. He had arrived as if he'd been there before the town was even built, and he stayed as naturally as dust on the road. Sometimes children ran past to tease him because his flowers weren't pretty. But it was those same children who, on days when tears streaked their cheeks, would quietly come to take a flower from his hand, then run off, holding it like treasure. Across town in a shabby cafe called Jenny's Place, a young man sat hunched over a cup of cold coffee, tousled brown hair, shadowed eyes, a faded coat. He looked like a ghost lingering where it no longer belonged. People were used to seeing him sit there for hours, not speaking, not smiling, not even reading the paper, doing nothing but staring into the air before him. His name was Michael Carter, 22. Only a few months earlier, he had a whole sky of dreams finishing college, landing a good job, and most of all, a blazing love with his girlfriend Emily. Then the accident came, like a blade cleaving his life in two. Emily died in a traffic collision on the spot. Since that day, Michael's world had become a chain of heavy hours dragged forward with no reason why. The townspeople pitied him, but kept their distance. They whispered behind his back, "Poor kid, he'll never get over it." Michael couldn't care less. Everyone seemed a stranger to him. Every word was just wind. He lived inside a shell of pain, letting no one touch it. Then one late afternoon, as the sun slid slowly down over the rooftops, Michael walked along the road where the old man sold flowers. He had no intention of paying attention and hurried to pass, but a low, husky voice rose, quiet yet clear. "Would you like a flower?" Michael stopped. He looked down. The old man's sinewy hands were outstretched, and in his palm lay a small yellow daisy. No one in town didn't know the old man, but Michael had never cared. The old man's eyes held no pity, no, probing only a gentle steadiness, bright like a small flame in a winter dusk. Michael frowned. "I don't need it," the old man smiled. "A flower can't bring the past back to life, but sometimes it helps the heart remember how to smile a little." Michael didn't answer. For a second his heart clenched not at the flower itself, but at the disarming simplicity of the words. He snatched the flower, shoved it in his pocket, and walked away quickly, as if afraid someone might see. Even after he'd gone, his hands still felt the lingering warmth of that little wildflower. Wind rushed down the main street, flipping a few bills taped in layers to the utility pole outside the general store. The bell over Jenny's Place jingled as Michael pushed in. The air inside was thick with the smell of burnt coffee, cold waffles, and the tinny buzz of an old radio broadcasting traffic reports from 100 miles away. Jenny, the owner, whose blue eyes had faded from too many late nights, looked up and gave a small nod. They had an unspoken pact. He came in, she poured coffee, no questions asked. Michael took his usual table by the window. The glass was fogged by the cold, leaving only gray smears of passing trucks. The yellow daisy lay quiet in his coat pocket, pressing like a pebble. He pulled it out and set it beside the chipped porcelain cup. The petals were so thin it felt as if a strong breath might break them. The yellow wasn't a glaring blaze. It was soft, like a low note resonating somewhere inside. Jenny came around and noticed the flower. "Pretty," she said, keeping her voice even. From the old man by the road, Michael nodded, then hunched as if caught out. He muttered, "I didn't buy it. He gave it to me." "He always does," Jenny replied. "Once I saw him give a flower to an old woman on a bus." She cried her eyes out. She set a muffin on his table and gestured that it was on the house. "Eat something warm." Michael wasn't hungry. Still, he tore the muffin apart piece by piece, as if cracking something so stiff inside himself. He thought of Emily. She had loved everything. Yellow marigolds on the porch, yellow sticky notes everywhere, even pale yellow sneakers that looked a little dorky, though she'd laugh. "Who says sunshine is tacky?" The images flowed out without asking him for permission. Another afternoon summertime on the grass by the ball field, Emily pulled a yellow hair tie from her hair, tied it around his wrist and said, "So, you remember, you're not allowed to lose me." He laughed loud and grabbed her hand, running in circles like a child. Wind slapped his face, the smell of fresh-cut grass tingled, and their laughter shattered like glass on tiles. Beautiful and dangerous, beautiful because it was alive. Dangerous because once lost, the shards could slice through the rest of a life. The door opened again. A long-haul trucker coat steeped in gasoline and cigarette smoke stomped dirt from his boots. He saw the yellow daisy on Michael's table and halted, muttering, "That old man. My wife died last year. He gave me a flower. Don't know why I kept it, but I stuck it on the dash. Every time I drive through this town, I look at it." He ordered coffee and sat far off, but his gaze kept drifting back to the daisy, like a man searching for bearings on a worn map. Michael turned away. Any story of loss, no matter how softly told, was a newly sharpened knife. Touch it, and you bled. He wanted to put the daisy back in his pocket, bury it deep with all the things he didn't dare reach for. But his fingers held the stem as if that thin stalk might keep him from sliding into an invisible pit. He took a sip of coffee, bitter. The bitterness smacked his tongue and yanked him into the present. He sighed and pushed the cup away, wondering how such a small flower could make the room feel so crowded. Outside, the rain began fine powdery drops clinging to the window, threading into vague patterns. Trucks passed, spinning up filthy plumes. On the corner, the old man's folding chair was still there. Rain silvered his coat. He had no umbrella. He pulled the basket against his chest, covering it with his body, the way someone shields a child. Michael stood. He didn't know what he meant to do. Stepping out, he raised his collar and hurried. Rain spilled down his neck, cold to the bone. The old man looked up when Michael's shadow fell across the basket. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question, as if it were simply the natural order of things. "You should find shelter," Michael blurted, startled by his own voice. He'd grown so used to silence that hearing himself sounded strange. "Shelter where?" The old man smiled gently. "Rain's no matter. Flowers like rain. Sad people sometimes need it too." Michael glanced at the basket daisies, a few small white wildflowers, some purple morning glories with roots still dusty. "Do you sell many?" "Some days yes, some days no," he said, sliding his chair closer to the wall to dodge the wind. "But selling isn't all I do." Michael said nothing. The old man tilted his head, studying him without prying. "You're carrying a hole. Not everyone can see a hole. But when people look at you, they know you're avoiding it, walking around it, and it's circling around you." "What do you know about me?" Michael snapped. He wasn't quick to anger, but some days besides the pain, all he had left was a thin bristle to push people away. He'd done it to Jenny, to his mother over the phone, to old friends who called, hesitated, and then gave up. "I know sorrow has a sound," the old man said evenly. "It doesn't shout, doesn't pound on doors. It just sits down and grows heavy as stone. Wherever you go, you haul it." The rain deepened, drops suddenly fattened, and drummed down like hurried fingers. People on the street ran for awnings. Michael edged closer under the leaky tin eave of a shop that had shut down last year. Across the road, a rusted water tower loomed, a hunchback, begging alms of the rain. "Where do you live?" Michael asked, unwilling to bear the silence. "Behind the old church. An empty storage room. The priest lets me use it so long as I tend the garden," he said. "You can stop by. There's more weeds than flowers, but weeds belong to a garden too." Michael nodded absently. He had no intention of going anywhere people were. Anyone's presence made him feel misplaced, like someone forced to stay awake at a party. Yet the line "weeds belong to a garden too" pierced him in a new way. It sounded like acceptance and A warning imperfection isn't the enemy. A little boy in a baseball cap ran past clutching a soaked puppy. The old man held out a sprig of morning glory. The boy hesitated, then took it. "Free, sir, if you need it," he said. The boy smiled a crooked smile from the cold but real. Michael touched his pocket, where the daisy had warmed inside the wet fabric. He suddenly understood without needing to explain why people like the old man existed like a street lamp on a corner. It didn't hold up any roof or stop any storm, but it kept a small circle of light where someone could remember where they were. The rain eased. The old man rose, trembling slightly to fold his chair. Michael almost said, "Let me help," but he was afraid he'd be bound to something larger than a kind gesture, and he wasn't ready for larger things. "I'll be here tomorrow," the old man said, as if reassuring himself. "Flowers always know the way back to the street." Michael turned away without promising. He walked along the faded white curb-line potholes brimful with water, reflecting the low, leaden sky. Each step landed with a bothersome squelch. But through the squelch, another sound drifted in church bells' share-off. Steady, not urging, not accusing. His rented room was on the second floor of a red brick building, with paint flaking off like snakeskin. In the kitchenette, a plastic clock ran 3 minutes slow. A bare ceiling bulb shivered whenever wind pressed through the doorframe. He set the daisy in a chipped glass, filled it halfway from the tap. The petals touched water and trembled. Looking at it, he felt he had run all day only to arrive back here. A room short on warmth, long on shadows, and a nameless flower trying to stand straight. His phone buzzed. His mother. He let it ring. A text followed, "Son, I won't ask anymore. I just want to know if you've eaten." He typed and erased, "I'm fine." Typed and erased, "I miss you." In the end, he sent nothing. The room swallowed the sounds again. He opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of photos. Emily smiled in most of them. In sunlight, in shade on the floor, out in the fields. Her smile made the space inside the photos feel windy. He placed one picture beside the daisy. The two lay there quiet as if talking. He allowed himself 1 minute of not controlling what was happening in his chest. 1 minute only, afraid that if it lasted longer, he'd drift past the borders of himself. Dusk thickened. Laughter from a variety show bled through the wall, from the next apartment ragged, as the last raindrops on the tin roof. He stood, shrugged off his coat, turned on the small heater, and sat at the table to write a few lines. An old habit writing helped sort the tangles. He wrote, "Today I received a daisy from an old man whose name I don't know. He said flowers help the heart remember to smile. I didn't smile, but my heart did something like breathing. Maybe." He looked up. The daisy leaned a little as if bowing. He let out a small laugh, the kind halfway form that even he barely recognized. Life has tricks like that. It reaches out, taps your shoulder, then pulls back before you can protest. Out on the street, a lamp flickered once before steadying. Across the way, the rusty Anchor bar turned up classic rock, the singer's raspy voice mixed with clinking glasses. Michael switched off the room's light and left only the desk lamp. The yellow glow narrowed the world into a small circle, the daisy, the photo, the notebook. Inside that circle was a hollow just the right size for a name. Night deepened. He dreamed of a field after rain. Tire tracks still printed, the earth water gleamed. Emily sat there with her back to a fence post, her pale yellow sneakers muddy. She didn't speak, she just held out a flower. Not a rose, not anything fancy. A common daisy, its round heart like a compressed sun. He reached, but the flower kept slipping back a step, inviting rather than giving. When he lunged to catch up, the scene snapped away, no field. Only the main street with darkened storefronts and an empty folding chair. The flower lay on the chair waiting. He woke with a start. Morning spread ash-gray light across the narrow stairs. He washed his face, shrugged into his coat, and meant to leave straight away. At the door, he turned back and lifted the daisy from the glass. Its petals drooped a little after the long night. He held it carefully, hesitated, then tucked it into his inner pocket. A small motion no one saw, but it changed the way he descended the stairs, slower, steadier, as if something fragile rode in his coat. Outside, the old man was already there earlier than usual. A young mother stood before him with a baby in her arms. The baby's face was flushed from crying, fists wrestling with a knit cap. The old man held out a tiny white wildflower, small as a dewdrop. The baby stopped crying to look, just to look, but that brief pause was enough for the mother to breathe. Michael stood across the street. He didn't call out, didn't go closer. He watched it like a ritual ordinary to the point of strangeness. A bookmobile parked a few steps away. The librarian slid the door open and laid out worn books with cracked spines. No one jostled. This town didn't jostle for anything. Everything happened slowly, as if even time were tired. Jenny carried over a thermos of coffee and set it on the steps near the old man. "Have something warm," she said. He thanked her, cupping the cup in both hands as steam fogged his glasses. Michael pushed his hands into his pockets and touched the daisy. He told himself, just stand for a moment, then go. He didn't want to be drawn into anyone's fabric. But one moment stretched into 10. 10 into 20. Nothing special happened. A schoolboy sat on the steps biting an apple. A middle-aged man wheeled a bike past its chain squealing. An old woman picked up a dropped coin and slipped it into a cloth purse. Somehow these things gathered into a plain logic someone gives, someone receives. Flowers go from basket to hand, from hand to chest, from chest to memory. A path that makes no sound. The old man looked up and met Michael's eyes. No big smile, just a nod that said, "I know you're there." That was enough. Michael nodded back. A strange feeling rose like when he was a child standing on the pool's starting block feet, not yet in the water, but skin prickling, knowing it would be cold. Something waited beneath the surface. Not a monster, maybe just a current. Sparrows settled on the power line, feathers puffed against the wind. A bus pulled up and dropped off a few workers. Its wheels rolled through a puddle, spraying arcs. A daisy fell from the basket. Michael stepped forward, picked it up, and handed it back. His fingers brushed the old man's dry and warm. "Thank you," the old man said. "This flower would be wasted if it fell." Michael blurted the words so clumsy, he felt ashamed as soon as they left him. "It's not wasted. Flowers fall so people will bend down." The old man smiled. "When people bend down, they see the things they used to pass by." Michael had no answer, but his knees seemed to loosen. He sat on the steps, leaving a courteous gap between himself and the basket. The daisy in his pocket pressed lightly, reminding him that he too now carried a bit of yellow. "What's your name?" the old man asked for the first time. "Michael." "I'm Eli," he said, light as if solving a simple riddle. A name was just a coat hook for a back. He had a name now, which meant he could be called. Michael nodded. A name is an anchor in a town made mostly of drifting things. The church bells rang again 2 minutes early today. Eli tilted his head, hand lifting slightly as if listening to a tune he knew by heart. "They're practicing the bells," he said. "There's a memorial service this Sunday. There's a memorial here every week." Michael didn't ask for whom. In this town, asking didn't change much. The gone were many. Those who remained learned to put their names into the bells. The wind shifted. Eli drew the basket closer. "Could you help me carry the basket to the old church after noon?" he asked, as easily as setting another flower in someone's palm. Michael looked up. The word no was already parked in his mouth. He'd kept it there for every invitation these past months. But just then a passing car stirred the papers in his hand and sent them skittering down the steps. He bent to pick them up, his palm touching stones still warm with yesterday's sun. That bent posture, the one Eli had mentioned, brought his eyes level with the basket. Among the petals, a green beetle was climbing slow, as reciting a line of verse. Thus no dropped away like a stone tossed into water. "All right," Michael said low. I'll help." Eli nodded, as if he'd known all along. No effusive thanks, no sigh of relief. Just the recognition of a ripeness reached. "Afternoon then," he said. "Flowers like to go for a walk." Michael stood. He needed to get back to Jenny's place to tell her he'd be late if she expected him behind the counter for the rush, a temp job he'd taken to cover rent. He would pour coffee-wipe tables, dodge pitying looks. But now, in the middle of those small tasks, a new line had been added to the day's ledger. Afternoon, carry the basket with Eli to the old church. He walked on, feeling the daisy in his pocket, tap lightly against his chest with each step. Not a heart's laughter, but a movement. Small enough for no one else to notice, large enough that the person inside knew something had shifted, even if only by an inch. Down the street, the church's wooden sign, its paint peeling, threw back a shard of sun. The heavy wooden door stood ajar. In the resonant dimness of the nave, perhaps the scent of old candles still lingered, and somewhere a fallen flower would be waiting for someone to bend down. Noon slid over the town like a tired cat, hunting for sunlight. Light scattered into broken shards on the sidewalk, glinting and then snuffed out as trucks tore past. The wind carried gasoline and damp earth, a mix so familiar no one bothered to question it. Michael stood on the edge of Jenny's Place's awning, hands burrowed deep in his coat pockets, fingers finding the daisy from the night before. The petals had softened cool to the touch, like the tip of a silver spoon. He didn't know why he still carried it. Maybe because it was the only thing in months that hadn't demanded an explanation. Eli was already at the corner, exactly where the folding chair always stood, like a supporting character who didn't need a name. The basket of flowers rested close to the wall. There were more wildflowers today, including tiny blue ones Michael had never noticed in the fields behind the church. Around Eli's dry wrist was a frayed strip of cloth, like bandage fabric washed too many times. He lifted a daisy, turned it so the petals caught the sun, then let it fall back a motion, slow as someone counting prayer beads. "You came," he said when he saw Michael cross the street. "The basket's heavier today. Looks like the northern hill got more rain." Michael gave a slight nod. He wanted to say something ordinary hello, but his throat stretched tight and dry. He answered with another gesture, bending to lift the basket, testing the weight. Not heavy enough to be hard, but enough to remind his wrists he still had muscles left to use. "We can go around the back of the church." Eli tipped his chin. "It's cooler there." They followed the brick path, their steps forming a strange rhythm, the long, slow stride of the old and the short, hesitant step of the young. Wind slanted through, snagging on the rusty sign at the mechanics and making a hinge groan. Michael let his eyes rest on things he'd passed by without recording a fence. Missing 2 slats, a small maple sprouting new shoots from a sawn stump. A patch of wall where someone had scrawled "Hope" in red paint, the O wobbly, like a wheel with a loose axle. "Where do you get the flowers?" Michael asked low, as if loud words might crack the thin air around them. "Where they grow," Eli said, no wordplay intended, yet the answer reached farther than the question. "Irrigation ditches, hillsides under fences. People call them weeds, as if the name made them meaningless. But they know how to find the sun." Michael looked at the basket. The mismatched colors made a strange harmony of their own. He remembered Emily talking about color pairing. If one color is too loud, put it next to a very gentle one. They'll make peace with each other. He had once scoffed at her color theory, saying plants didn't know theory. She had pouted. Not knowing theory doesn't mean not knowing how to live. The old church appeared beyond a row of red brick buildings, its gray stone roof mossed like an old rule book. In daylight, the wooden door yawned wide, playing the mouth of a giant fish that had no wish to swallow anyone. The back lot was ankle-deep in grass, freckled with tiny blooms, wrapping around a weathered tin shed. Eli pointed to the shed door. "There are vases and old jars in there. We'll arrange the flowers, then bring them into the nave before people come to light candles this evening." "How long have you been doing this?" Michael asked, as he set the basket on the wooden step. "I don't count," Eli said. "At first I just needed something to make the long days less long. Later I realized I didn't have to wait for the days to grow short." The words fell between them light as dust, but glinting in the sun. Michael opened the shed. Damp wood and rusty metal rushed his nose. On the shelves sat brown stoneware vases, glass jars, and a few bottles with torn labels. He rinsed them at the outdoor spigot, set them to dry on the grass ledge, the runoff streaming like silver threads. Eli, meanwhile, lifted flowers one by one and set them into the vessels, hands steady, gestures practiced. Michael picked up a tall vase, hesitated before a cluster of yellow daisies. He didn't even know how to arrange flowers. Emily had arranged them in anything: bean cans, milk glasses, water bottles, even an old shoe. Everything became a lovely container in her hands. He glanced at Eli. The old man didn't instruct, didn't correct. He let Michael find his own way, like a seasoned teacher who knows lessons remembered longest are the ones learned slowly. Michael tried fumbling. The daisy heads leaned drunkenly, nodding as if sunstruck. At last, he set one bloom in the center, 2 shorter ones balancing at the sides, and added a few green leaves to cover the stems. Without meaning to, he'd made a structure imperfect but standing. He set the vase down, took a step back, and felt his chest ease by half a beat. "Good," Eli said, like an old friend clapping his shoulder, especially the space in the middle. The space. Michael blinked. You didn't pack it tight. You left a place to breathe." Eli bent to pick up a small, fallen blue flower, lifting it like a word dropped from a line. People are afraid of emptiness, so they cover everything with things, noise, words. But it's the space that lets the rest mean something. Michael wasn't sure he understood it all, but the phrase gripped somewhere deep inside where wind slips in and stays. He thought of his room where sounds died too quickly. Maybe he hadn't left a true space there. Maybe he'd left only empty emptiness. They kept arranging. Noon tilted the church roof's shadow spread over the grass like a cold blanket. A gray cat padded by without a sound. Each finished vase took on a personality. Some were bright as a tossed net of sunlight. Some were leisurely like a long exhale. Michael found himself sorting them by mood: this one, a good morning; that one, a lonely evening; another, a lunchtime in a strange place. When the last vase was done, Eli nodded. "Let's bring them in." He handed Michael 2 vases and took 2 himself. They went through the side door into the nave. Inside was cool and dim, the smell of old wood and candle wax folding around them. Sunlight filtered through stained glass, breaking into red, blue, and yellow panes on the floor, making you step carefully, as if afraid to crack them. Here, Eli pointed to the long table near the lectern. Michael set the vase down, the glass tapping the wood so softly it was almost nothing. He dropped into a back pew and looked out at the road through the open doorway. The world out there, trucks smoke bolts, wrinkled paper slipped back. Here, breaths seemed longer. He didn't have to believe in God to feel another kind of order present, silent but honoring. Eli opened a tin of candles and replaced a few short ones with tall. "Every day someone needs light," he said, as if reminding himself. "You can light one, no reason needed." Michael stood uncertain. Lighting a candle meant admitting something, didn't it? Prayer meant looking straight into some empty place and calling its name. He wasn't sure he was ready to name anything. But his hands found the matches, struck one. Flame leaped up soft and gold as a voice in the night. He touched it to the candle's tip. The wax took fire, a white bead sliding down the forming column. He fit the candle into its brass ring. He said nothing. In his mind, Emily's name kept surfacing, each letter clear, as if written on glass. "Thank you," he said, surprised the words had escaped. "Thank you for what?" For arranging flowers, for a space where he didn't have to pretend, for a daisy that hadn't shouted yet, still existed. Eli shrugged a one-corner smile. "Flowers like unhurried people," he said. "And unhurried people like flowers." They were quiet a long time. An elderly couple came in and sat mid-pew, hands laced, eyes forward. They didn't cross themselves, didn't kneel, just sat as if in a vast waiting room where people learn to sit. Michael watched their hands and thought of Emily's, her pinky always the coldest. The thought didn't jab like a needle. It arrived and lay down like a flower set on a table. "Do you plan to go back to school?" Eli asked, not looking at him. "I don't know," Michael answered honestly. "Every plan sounds like music with the sound turned off. I can see mouths moving, I know they're singing, but I don't hear it." Eli nodded as someone who had heard that line many times from himself. Sometimes the only way to hear music again is to memorize your breathing first. People think hope comes from big ideas. Often it comes from doing one small thing you can do right now. Like arranging flowers, Michael looked up. Like carrying a vase from the back lot into the sanctuary. Eli gestured to 2 more. "Help me with these." Michael lifted a vase and walked along the band of colored light. With each step, the water in the vase shimmered, making almost sound. He set the new vase beside the old ones and watched them lean into each other like friends newly met and instantly close. There was no triumph, no breakdown, no lightning bolt, just the world giving a small nod. By the time they stepped back into the yard, the sun had gathered toward the west, pulling the church's shadow long like a bold underscore. Kids from the nearby block ran past, chasing each other around the flagpole, laughter stitching into the open air. A little blonde girl stopped and eyed the few flowers left in the basket. "May I take one?" she asked, shy but clear. "You may," Eli said, "but it has a job to do, you know." "What job?" Her eyes went round. "To make at least one person smile." She nodded solemnly. Chose a white flower edged in pink and ran off. Michael watched her touch the bloom to the hand of the pastry lady across the street. The woman burst into a grin, the lines at her eyes folding into tiny roads. Mission accomplished, simple, no paperwork required. They packed up. Eli folded the chair. Michael lifted the now light basket. On the way back to the main street, Eli paused by the wall with the crooked hope. He pulled a stub of white chalk from his pocket and added a small apostrophe to the O, making it look like a smiling eye. "The painter won't mind," he said, voice conspiratorial. Michael smiled, brief as a leaf flipping in wind. "Do you make a habit of fixing the world with chalk?" "I just add a pinch of salt," Eli replied. "So, the dish remembers it has flavor." When they reached the corner, Jenny's place was busier. Jenny saw Michael walking with Eli. Surprise flickered across her face. Then she smiled the way someone smiles at a shaft of sunlight slipping through cloud. "I'll need you bussing tables at 4, she told Michael. "And the flowers are beautiful." She turned to Eli. "What spell did you cast?" "No spell," Eli shook his head. "Just two people trading light things between their hands." Jenny nodded satisfied and pressed a hot paper cup into Eli's hands. "Cocoa. Not too sweet," she said. "Don't argue." Eli accepted cupping it, exhaling like a man who has found a fireplace in a storm. The sight gave Michael a gentle nudge inside, light, but definite. This town, poor old cracked, had underground streams running through it, seldom surfacing, sometimes bubbling up as a quiet laugh. He thought that if he ever left his memory, wouldn't be the rusted water tower or the oil-slick road, but the times one hand placed something small into another. "You've got your own flower already," Eli said softly when Michael's hand hovered at his pocket like a check. "Don't lose it." "I won't promise," Michael answered honestly. "No need to." Eli's gaze slid to a man who had just walked up, face-tight collar askew, eyes red like someone long sleepless. The man stood there a moment, then rasped, "Do you have a flower for someone who just got fired?" Eli didn't ask which company or why. He chose a blue bloom, its topmost petal still wet with dew, and set it in the man's hand. "For someone who's temporarily forgotten his own worth," he said quietly. "Keep it a day. Tomorrow pass it to someone else." The man nodded, lips trembling, and turned away. Michael watched him go and grasped that a flower's job wasn't only to make someone smile. It was to remind a person he wasn't just his job, not merely a failure printed on a page. He looked at his own daisy, the first one. One petal was creased, bearing the tooth marks of time. Strangely, the crease made it feel more like him, no longer pristine, yet still itself. He drew it out and held it at eye level. The afternoon light filtered through the thin petals, darkening the golden heart, like an old coin newly polished. A sentence rose in his mind from no known source. "Not everything beautiful is new. Some beauty requires time, a bruise, a loss." "Eli," he called for the first time, saying the name properly rather than the old man. "Thank you for the flower." Eli paused mid-step, like someone hearing a familiar song through a wall. He nodded, adding nothing. Michael stepped into Jenny's place, hung his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and started his shift. He poured coffee, wiped tables, brought pastries to the heater. In the coat pocket on the hook, the daisy lay warming to the room. Now and then he glanced at the window and saw Eli still at the corner, the folding chair an extension of him, the basket down to a few precarious blooms. Each time someone approached, Eli tipped his head a little toward them, like a technician tuning a radio to catch a song. By late afternoon, the sky pulled a faint pink streak across itself, like a colored pencil swiped once. Michael finished his shift, stepped outside, and didn't look for Eli. He was gone. Only a damp patch on the brick where the basket had rested remained, like the shadow of a thing that had moved on. Michael stood a few seconds, then looked at his hands. He thought of tomorrow, of perhaps carrying the basket to the church again, of lighting another candle of that silence that respects people. The thoughts didn't surge or strain. They sat down beside him, the way sorrow once had, only lighter. By the time he reached his room, the streetlights were on. He set the daisy in the chipped glass again, changed the water, careful as cueing a national anthem before a game. He sat and wrote, "Today I carried flowers to the church. I arranged a vase that wasn't stuffed full. I left space." I think Emily would smile at that. I didn't laugh out loud, but I did smile. Maybe. He capped the pen, leaned his head against the wall, and closed his eyes. Traffic sounds washed in like waves on rock, steady now, no longer threatening. The daisy on the table didn't glow, didn't speak. It had one job: to be present, and somehow it did more, stringing a fine thread from yesterday to tomorrow, giving today a place to stand. Somewhere down the street, Eli was likely seated in the church storeroom, hands wrapped around a cup of cocoa, listening to the bells practice again. Each peal widened into rings that touched window glass wires, and people like Michael, not enough to change the world, but enough to change the reach of an arm. Sometimes that is enough for a person to take one more step. The first flower had come to Michael without drama, no prophecy, no lightning. It entered his life like breath returning after a long cough, a small movement unmistakable and clear. From here, the story didn't need to promise triumph. It only needed to continue the way roads keep leading to the church, the way a candle keeps burning down, the way wildflowers keep appearing along a fence. And in that continuing, a heart that thought it was finished began to relearn its own rhythm. There were nights when Michael couldn't sleep, and by the time dawn began to leak through the blinds, he would find himself sitting bolt upright, eyes wide, as though yanked out of a deep pit. In the thick darkness of his rented room, he could hear his heart pounding, not steady, not rhythmic, but in frantic, staggering bursts, as if it no longer wanted to be a biological organ, and instead insisted on being a reminder, you're still alive even if you don't want to be. On those nights, Emily's image appeared with such clarity, it frightened him into thinking he was losing his mind. He saw her golden hair in the summer sun, the way she laughed behind the wheel of her old car, the brightness in her eyes when she sang along to the radio. Every detail appeared flawless, so flawless, Michael couldn't tell where memory ended and where his mind had begun fabricating hallucinations, just to torture him. When he first met Emily, the town had still been a place that felt worth living in. They met in a night class where Michael had gone to pick up credits for college. Emily sat at the desk beside him, hair tied carelessly, the faint scent of cheap soap lingering in a way that stayed in his memory. She was different, no heavy makeup, none of the weary disillusionment that coated most young people in town. She always spoke of her dream to leave, to move to a city, to open a little bookstore cafe. People need a quiet place, she said firmly. Somewhere to read, to dream, to forget about those trucks outside for a while. Michael had laughed out loud. Nobody reads here anymore. They only read the gas price signs. But Emily hadn't flinched. She had just looked at him with those shining brown eyes. Then we'll open a place that makes them remember reading matters as much as eating. That memory was like an old painting, edges smudging more each time he pulled it out, but the colors kept their warmth. Emily was light. She made everything around Michael less gray, less heavy, less meaningless. They had spent afternoons sitting on the rusted water tower, legs dangling, hands clasped. Emily had said, "When I leave, what I'll miss most is the wind up here. It blows away the stench of gasoline, and it reminds me this town still has one kind of freedom." Michael had laughed, pulled her close, and thought to himself that he would keep her by his side forever. But then came one June night, summer just starting, when his phone buzzed past midnight. A mutual friend's voice stammered through the line, shaky breaking. "Michael, Emily, there's been an accident. On the highway. Get to the hospital." He remembered the road there as endless. Streetlights flickered one by one like a line of bowed heads. At the hospital, the doctor only shook his head. Emily had died instantly. No chance, no goodbye. A truck, a collision, and everything was over. Her death didn't just take away a girlfriend. It stripped Michael of the entire future he had built in his head, the small apartment in the city, the bookstore cafe, the morning laughter, the summer road trips. All of it vanished in a single moment, leaving behind an emptiness so vast it swallowed everything else. He remembered standing at the funeral, staring at the closed coffin, one thought looping endlessly. It should have been me driving that night. It should have been me there in her place. People came to console him, spouting their cliches. She's in a better place, time heals. Michael nodded, but inside he was screaming, there is no better place for her than here, and no time heals anything. After the funeral, Michael became a shadow. He dropped out of school, quit his job, cut ties with friends. His mother called constantly, but he answered only briefly, his replies clipped before hanging up. In his room, he sat staring at the ceiling, sometimes playing music, though entire songs slipped past without him hearing a word. Nothing had taste anymore. Sometimes he wandered out to the highway, to the spot where Emily had died. The police's white spray paint markings still scarred the asphalt. He stood there for hours, eyes dry, imagining himself lying down on that very spot, disappearing like her. Only the roar of trucks reminded him the world doesn't stop for anyone. Once he drank himself senseless and collapsed on the curb, waking in the chill of dawn, his coat drenched with dew. In his pocket was a photo of him and Emily, its edges smudged with ink. He had laughed bitterly, realizing his life was nothing but yellowed memories, now like torn photos no one cared to keep. What haunted Michael most wasn't the grief, it was the guilt. He believed he should have protected Emily, should have been there, should have prevented it. In his dreams, he often saw the truck barreling toward her, and himself frozen too late to act. He woke drenched in cold sweat, heart racing with one question clawing him raw. If I had been there, would she still be alive? Friends tried to pull him back out into the world, but he snapped at them, pushed them away. He couldn't bear the sight of anyone happy, laughing, planning their future. To him, those things felt like betrayal against his pain. He believed he wasn't allowed to be happy, wasn't allowed to go on, because that would mean he was leaving Emily behind. Since her death, the town had turned into a cage. Every street was a trigger: the cafe they had visited, the general store, where she bought chewing gum, the grass by the ball field, where they had sat for hours. Even the rusted water tower, once her symbol of freedom, was now nothing but a cold slab of metal, reminding him of a promise broken. He hated seeing those memories, but couldn't leave either. The town bound him like rope, because anywhere else he feared he would forget her. Staying meant suffering. Leaving meant betraying her memory. He was trapped, circling endlessly in his own snare. Once Michael tried keeping a journal again, like he used to when Emily was alive, but the blank page stacked up like stone walls. He held the pen and managed only one line. "My heart is like a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a piece of memory, but put together they show only blood." He had thrown the pen torn, the pinch crumpled it, yet the sentence clung to him, refusing to go. The wound in his heart didn't bleed outward, but it stabbed him daily, a constant reminder he had never truly healed. It wasn't just the loss of a lover, it was the loss of himself, of faith, of meaning. Michael believed his life had ended the night of the accident. Everything after was only an echo, a corpse dragging itself forward without purpose. And then in that long chain of gray days, there came the yellow daisy in Eli's hand. Small, trivial compared to the gaping hollow inside him, yet it felt like a seed that had found a crack in the wall. Michael didn't know why that flower made him keep it. Maybe the yellow reminded him of Emily. Maybe it was Eli's eyes that carried no pity, or maybe it was simply that it was the only thing he had accepted without cost. But he knew this when he placed the daisy in a chipped glass of water. For the first time since the accident, he felt his heart stir, just a faint, fragile beat, but movement nonetheless. That winter morning, a sheet of leaden cloud smothered the town's sky. Wisps of mist drifted over rooftops and beaded into droplets on the tangle of power lines. The main street was as quiet as ever. A few early commuters slipped by, their breath turning white. At the familiar corner, Eli sat his rickety folding chair, creaking each time he shifted. The basket before him was so full, the petals crowded over the rim, white, yellow, blue, pale violet. Michael stopped at a distance. In his coat pocket, he still carried the withered yellow daisy. The petals drooped to the flower's darkened core like a sun gone cold. He hadn't thrown it away. He didn't know why he kept it. Maybe because some part of him feared that tossing it would sever the thin string tying him to the change that had begun the day he met Eli. "You're here," Eli called before Michael had fully approached. "Help me carry the flowers to the church again. A lot of people need them today." Michael lifted the basket. The motion felt more natural than the last time. Questions had started to form in his mind, but his tongue remained heavy. They walked together to the back of the church. The grass was silvered with frost, cold enough to dampen their cuffs. They went into the storeroom, washed jars and vases, arranged flowers, as they had the week before. This time, as Michael worked, Eli watched a long while and then said softly, "Do you ever wonder why I sit out there day after day, knowing I'll never get rich from a handful of wildflowers?" Michael paused, looked over. "Yes, but I figured you wouldn't answer." Eli smiled, the crow's feet at his eyes deepening. "Most people don't ask. They just see an eccentric old man. But you asked. That means you're ready to listen." He set down the vase in his hand, slowly pulled a chair closer, and sat. His voice was low and husky, but even and steady like an old drum. "I had a family once," he began. "A wife named Sarah, a 6-year-old boy named Daniel. A little house in the suburbs, green grass out front, the smell of baking in the evenings. We weren't rich, but we had enough. When I was young, I enlisted, served in Iraq. When I came home, I thought I'd left death behind. I thought I could start over." Michael sat still, his heart tightening. The way Eli spoke called up images with painful clarity. A young man holding his wife and child in the sunset, trusting the world to be gentle. But one winter night, I was on shift at the post office. Sarah and Daniel were home, the wiring shorted. The fire caught and spread faster than any cry could outrun it. By the time the neighbors noticed, it was too late. When I got there was only smoke and ash. I lost everything." Eli stopped. His eyes drifted to the slit of daylight through the shed boards. The strips of light marked the planes of his face, carving each wrinkle. Michael clenched his hands. The grief in that story resonated in him like a struck string humming a familiar note. I drank, Eli went on, slept on the street, wanted to end it. I thought, what's the point of living when the ones I loved most are gone? And then one morning I wandered over the northern field. In a charred patch after a brush fire, nothing but blackened timber and ash. There was a single small purple flower, just one. It didn't know it had bloomed in the wrong place at the wrong time. It only knew to reach for the sky. He drew a breath. When I saw it, I understood some things don't need a reason to exist. They exist because they can. And if a flower can grow out of cinders, then I could try to stand up one more time. Michael felt his throat close. In his mind appeared the yellow daisy he'd received that first day, small, defiant. He wondered if that had been the one flower that saved another man before it came to him. So, Eli continued, I began picking flowers. At first, just to remind myself. But then when I handed a bloom to someone crying by a grave, they looked up, and for 1 second something lit in their eyes. That second was enough for me. I realized flowers don't change fate, but they can help someone breathe one more breath, and sometimes one breath is enough to take another step. Michael remembered the rainy afternoon when Eli had given a sprig to the boy cradling his wet puppy. It had been only one breath, but it softened despair. People think I'm crazy, Eli said, shrugging. They say, you're not making money, just wasting time. But I don't want to sell flowers. I want to give them to the ones who need them. For me, every flower is a reminder there is still beauty in the world, however small, however fragile. Michael sat in silence. Eli's words touched the wound in his heart, not to tear it open, but to lay a soft cloth over it. He couldn't stop himself from asking, rasping, do you ever feel guilty for living when they're gone? Eli turned and looked straight into his eyes. Guilt is natural. I carried it for years. But I learned this guilt doesn't feed the dead. It only starves the living. When I give flowers, I don't forget Sarah or Daniel. On the contrary, I carry them with me. Every flower I give is a way of saying they were here, that their love is still blooming. Michael bowed his head, his hands trembling. The answer went straight through him, because it was what he had never dared to think. Emily didn't need him to torment himself to prove he loved her. Perhaps true love was to go on living and carry her in every step. When they finished the last arrangement, Eli rested a hand on the basket and said gently, wildflowers have a secret. They don't worry whether they'll end up in crystal vases. They simply bloom, if someone picks them good. If not, they leave their seeds for the next season. People are like that too. We don't have to be grand to have worth. We just need to bloom fully where we stand. Michael went quiet. He glanced at a small blue flower fallen on the floor, picked it up and set it in a vase. The gesture was simple, but inside him, it felt like fitting a shard back into place. By afternoon, they carried the flowers into the church nave. Light through the stained glass washed the petals in violet, gold, and green, making them more radiant than they had been that morning. Michael stood and watched, feeling as if he were inside a living painting. See, Eli said, we can't change death, but we can change how people walk through it. Sometimes a flower is enough to keep someone from collapsing today. Michael nodded. For the first time in months, his eyes were wet, not only with pain. There was a new glimmer there, braided from longing and hope. He whispered as if to himself, maybe I can try to live one more breath. In the days after that afternoon at the church, Michael carried with him a strange new awareness, as though he was walking the same streets, but suddenly noticing details he had long ignored. The amber leaves of the maple at the corner, the faint hiss of the power lines when wind pushed through the pale sunlight streaming through the dust-streaked window of his rented room, all of it came into sharper focus. These things did not make him happy outright, but they reminded him the world still existed outside his grief. He began keeping a journal again. Each night after finishing his shift at Jenny's place, he sat at his wobbly wooden desk, turned on the yellow lamp, and wrote. At first the entries were scattered lines. It's cold today. I saw a cat slip past the window. But slowly the words began to flow. Eli said wildflowers don't care where they grow. I wonder if I too could live more easily if I stopped caring where I stood. Every morning before heading to the cafe, Michael stopped at the corner. Eli was always there early, his basket full. Sometimes he offered Michael a bloom, sometimes only a nod. That presence became a steady mark in Michael's day, like a heartbeat, like a clock striking the hour. One morning, Michael sat beside Eli, both of them watching the trucks roar past. "Do you ever think you're wasting your time?" Michael asked, his voice carrying a hint of challenge. Eli sipped his tea from a paper cup. "You think giving flowers is a waste? No, but it doesn't change anything big." "You're mistaken," Eli said, smiling. "Flowers don't always change the world, but sometimes they change one person's world. And for that person, it is everything." Michael said nothing. The words tolled in his head like a bell that kept ringing after the strike was done. Still, whenever he found himself laughing at something small, Jenny's offhand joke, a puppy, wagging outside the store, sunlight slipping through iron bars, he was pulled back by guilt. He whispered to himself, "You are not allowed to laugh. Emily is gone. To laugh is to betray her." Once while wiping tables, Jenny turned on a bright pop song. Michael found himself humming along, lips curving into a smile. A jolt of panic followed. He dropped the cloth, his chest pounding, and hurried into the restroom. Staring at the mirror, he murmured, "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean to." He told Eli the next day. The old man thought for a long moment before replying, "Do you believe Emily wanted you to wither with her?" Michael's throat locked. "The dead don't need us to throw away our laughter," Eli continued. "They left it for us to keep. Your smile doesn't erase her. It proves she once made you happy." Michael lowered his head. A tear slipped and darkened his shoe. On a Saturday afternoon, Eli suddenly asked Michael, "I'm not well today. Will you watch the basket for me?" Michael blinked. "Me? I don't know how to give flowers. Just hand one to whoever you think needs it," Eli said firmly. "Don't overthink." So, Michael sat in the folding chair. The cold wind brushed his face, the basket before him feeling like a test. He sat awkwardly watching people pass. An elderly woman with a cane hobbled by, her eyes weary. Michael hesitated, then picked out a white bloom, stepped forward, and held it out. She looked surprised, then smiled softly as she took it. "Thank you, dear. It's been so long since anyone gave me flowers." Michael returned to the chair, heart racing. It was a small act, but it felt as though he had broken out of a heavy shell. That afternoon he gave away two more, one to a boy who had fallen off his bike, and was crying, another to a woman struggling with overloaded grocery bags. Each time he saw something shift, a softened gaze, a fleeting smile, and inside himself a similar shift occurred. That night when he lay down, the memories of Emily were no longer just the crash scene. He recalled skating with her on a frozen lake, both of them tumbling and laughing so hard the rink keeper scolded them. He remembered the smell of her apple pie cinnamon lingering in their small kitchen. These memories no longer pierced like blades. They rose gently, making him smile through his tears. He began to realize he didn't have to cling to pain as a duty. Perhaps holding on to love through beautiful memories was the truer way. One evening, with the town hushed, Michael and Eli sat in the church storeroom arranging flowers. The yellow lamp cast their shadows long on the wall. Michael asked Eli, "Do you ever fear that if you feel happiness, you'll forget Sarah and Daniel?" Eli shook his head. "No, happiness isn't a thief. It's how I carry them with me. I smell baking, and I remember Sarah. I hear children laugh, and I remember Daniel. Joy recalls them more than sorrow ever did." Michael sat stunned. He had never thought of it like that. He had believed his choice was either to hurt forever to keep Emily alive, or to feel joy and lose her. Eli had shown him a third path to feel joy, so that she stayed. The next day, Michael carried 3 small blue blossoms to Emily's grave. He stood for a long time, his hands trembling. "I laughed, Emily," he whispered. "I'm sorry, but I think maybe you'd want me to." Wind moved through the cemetery, stirring the dry leaves. Michael closed his eyes and let the tears fall, but this time they did not choke him. They were the tears of someone stepping out of shadow. From then on, Michael no longer avoided Eli. He often lingered longer, spoke more, even laughed more. The townsfolk grew used to the sight of the young man beside the old flower seller. They joked, 2 generations of florists now. But to Michael, it wasn't a joke. It was the process of reclaiming himself. The pain was still there, the wound in his heart not erased, but it no longer bled daily. From that wound, a space had opened where light could enter. Michael began to see he could go on, not to replace Emily, but to carry her memory forward with him. The winter of 2006 pressed into the town with sharper edges. Wind from the highway swept in bitter cold and carrying gray dust. The northern lake froze in plates. On the streets, wooden signs rattled on their hinges like the lungs of an old man in sickness. Michael had grown used to the cold days, but this was different. This was not just another icy gust. It was a storm, and a true one. By early morning, the sky had changed. The clouds were molten iron, heavy and low, as if they meant to crush the town flat. People hurried to shutter their windows, brace their awnings, stride faster down the street. The radio warned a severe snowstorm is expected to sweep through by afternoon. Residents are advised to remain indoors. Michael was wiping tables at Jenny's place when Jenny snapped off the radio with a sigh. No customers today. Everyone will hide from the storm. She glanced toward the window where Eli still sat under his flimsy tarp. He won't come in. Always out there. Shaking her head, she poured more coffee. Michael tried to bring him inside. Michael dried his hands and pulled on his coat. Outside, the wind was already stinging his face, flakes like needles striking skin. Eli was there as always, basket before him, thin coat neck wrapped in his old scarf. The daisies, the blues, the whites trembled, their petals shivering in the gale. "You need to come in," Michael called over the roar. "The storm's about to break." Eli looked up, eyes bright but ringed with shadows. "Flowers are needed in a storm, sad people even more." He smiled faintly, holding out a blue bloom to a young mother hurrying past with her child. She accepted it with a startled nod and hurried on, but her eyes softened, a trace of calm breaking through. Michael sank onto the curb beside him, tugging his collar tight. "You'll get sick." Eli shrugged. "Sometimes the only thing that keeps us alive is knowing we're useful to someone, even for a moment." The afternoon dimmed unnaturally fast. The sky blackened. The wind rose like screaming voices. Snow began to fall, thick, heavy, whitening the street in minutes. Shops slammed shut, lights going dark. The church bell, lashed by wind, clanged erratically. Jenny pulled the cafe door shut and shouted out, "Michael, come inside, Eli, too, hurry!" But Eli didn't move. He rose unsteadily, still clutching the basket, snow crusting his silver hair. "I still have flowers to give," he whispered. "The storm mustn't steal their smiles." Frustration flared in Michael. He seized the basket. "You're insane. Your life matters more." But Eli only smiled, his face a map of deep lines. "Then you take them. Today it's your turn. Find who needs them." A gust slammed into them, knocking both sideways. Eli doubled over, coughing, his hands trembling violently. Michael caught him and felt how frail he was, light, brittle, a body of twigs. Eli collapsed in his arms, lips tinged blue. Michael carried him into Jenny's place. Jenny gasped, "Dear God, lay him here." They stretched him on the long bench, wrapped him in blankets, rubbed his hands. Calls for help went out, but the storm had closed the roads. The ambulance said it couldn't reach them yet. All they could do was keep him warm, wait, hope. While Jenny bustled, Michael clutched the basket Eli had pressed into his arms. The wildflowers trembled in their bed. Eli's words echoed in his mind. "Take them to those who need." Fear constricted Michael's chest, but with it came a fierce surge. He knew what he had to do. He pulled his cap down, wound his scarf, and rushed out into the storm with the basket. Jenny shouted after him, but the wind swallowed her voice. The street was empty, snow piling fast, lamps flickering. Michael staggered through, scanning the whiteness. He spotted an old neighbor straining to push his cart up a slope, his face contorted against the cold. Michael stopped, plucked a daisy, and pressed it into the man's hand. Bewilderment flashed. Then the man gave a weary, grateful smile. "Thank you, son." Further on, under a shop awning, a teenager huddled with a battered guitar, shaking with cold despair in his eyes. Michael knelt, offered him a blue flower, whispering, "Hold it. It won't warm you, but it'll remind you you're still here." The boy's eyes lit faintly, his lips trembling a quiet thanks. With each flower he gave, Michael felt heat building in his chest, his heart thundering harder. The storm still raged, but he moved stronger, steadier. He realized he was carrying out Eli's long vigil, turning fragile blooms into sparks against the dark. By the time the basket neared empty, Michael stumbled back to Jenny's place, soaked and flushed. Eli lay on the bench, breath rattling, eyes barely open. When he saw Michael saw the empty basket, a frail smile tugged his lips. "Good. You did it." Michael dropped to his knees, gripping Eli's icy hand. "You'll be okay. The ambulance is on its way." Eli shook his head slightly. One way or another, the flowers reached who they should. Michael broke down, tears streaming, tears, not of hollow loss this time, but of fear of love for someone he could not bear to lose. They fell hot, melting the snow clinging to his shoulders. The storm raged on through the night. The wind howled through every seam, rattled glass, battered roofs. But inside the cafe, the yellow light held steady, embracing three souls: a young man learning how to love life again, a woman steady in her care, and an old man who had spent his life giving hope. Michael sat by Eli's side, never letting go of his hand. He felt each faint pulse, each shallow breath. In his mind, all Eli's words replayed about wildflowers, about space, about laughter as a way to remember. If you make it through this night, Michael promised silently, I won't ever falter again. I'll carry the flowers forward somehow. By dawn, the storm eased. Snow blanketed the town smooth and untouched, as though the world had been covered in a clean sheet. The ambulance finally arrived. Eli was lifted in his face, pale but tinged with warmth from their vigil. Michael stood at the cafe door, watching the vehicle disappear into the white. His heart was heavy but lit. He knew he had crossed a night he would never forget, the night the old man collapsed, and the night Michael truly began to live again. The next morning, snow lay still on the rooftops, like white blankets so flat and calm, you felt you could set a whole dream on top without it sliding off. The town was hushed. The first car carved two black lines through the street, like pencil strokes opening the day. Michael opened his window. The cold sliced his skin, but he didn't close it. He stood there a while, listening to the strange quiet that follows a storm, the soft tick of melting snow, the faint rattle of a lamppost, a crow calling to a friend far off. In the chipped glass sat yesterday's yellow daisy, its petals fully drooped. Michael meant to change the water, then stopped. He didn't keep the daisy because it was still pretty. He kept it because it was a small thread, stitching one day to the next. He lifted the flower and set it gently on a sheet of paper, then wrote in his journal, "The storm day flower has finished its task. Today I'll find a new one for someone else." He put on his coat, slid the notebook into his inner pocket, and headed down to the street. Jenny's place was open earlier than usual. The warm breath of cocoa and coffee worked like a greeting. Jenny stood behind the counter, eyes ringed with fatigue but bright. The ambulance took him right at dawn. "The hospital in the next town," she said, voice sleepy but relieved. "You going there first or—" "First," Michael said. "Then I'll come back." Jenny nodded and handed him a small paper box. "Pastries, for him and for you if anything's left." The hospital was a square block of concrete at the town's edge, the front walk stippled with footprints in the snow. The emergency ward shone a hard white fluorescent light, trimming everything into edges almost too sharp to bear. From the hallway window, Michael could see Eli on the bed, a thin oxygen tube resting beneath his nose, the green line of his heart monitor pacing steadily. His eyes were closed. He looked at peace, as if he had set down a burden without worrying who might pick it up. The nurse allowed a 10-minute visit. Michael stepped in, set the pastry box on the side table, and pulled a chair close. Eli opened his eyes, took a heartbeat to focus, then smiled faintly. "There you are." Michael took his hand, no preamble. "I did what you said." The basket was nearly empty when I came back. There was a kid with a guitar. He held the flower like a cord. Eli blinked, the smile widening a shade. "Good. That bloom must have known the tune." They were quiet a moment. The monitor kept time like a patient drummer tapping a table. Michael asked, "You'll rest for a while, won't you?" "Probably," Eli breathed. "Not labored, but tired. The body has spoken. But the flowers on the street will still grow. You know that." "Yes," Michael said. The words slipped out as lightly as breath. "I'll sit the chair today." Eli turned his head and looked at him. "No, thank you, no grand reaction. Just a small nod, the kind people give when a decision has ripened and needs no stamp." Back on the main street, Michael swung by Jenny's place for the basket. Jenny had cleaned it and lined the bottom with a layer of old paper. "You know that cut through the north field to the fence row? There are still blue flowers there," she murmured, like a gatekeeper whispering a secret to a benevolent thief. Michael grinned, pulled on his cap, and crossed the thin crust of snow. The way to the north bank was blue-white and silent, even the birds quiet. He bent and found small blue blooms, tough little things, pushing up along the melt-lined stems, trembling. He cut about a dozen, added a few leaves and blades of grass still beaded with thaw, and set them in the basket. Blue against white made the arrangement feel like a sigh finding its rhythm. Eli's folding chair still leaned against the wall, a strip of tape on the back scrawled with ELI. Michael brushed off the snow, opened the chair, and sat. The cold pierced his trousers like needles. Soon enough, his body learned how to bear it. He set the basket exactly where Eli liked it, level with a passerby's gaze. The first to stop was a middle-aged woman in a long black coat, eyes red-rimmed like someone short on sleep for days. She clutched a pharmacy sack in one hand. Seeing the flowers, she faltered. Michael didn't ask, "Would you like one?" He took out a daisy and offered it. She hesitated, her look asking the old question, "How much?" Michael shook his head. "Free, if you need it today." She held the flower, sniffed it very softly, as if afraid to break it. "My husband just had surgery," she said, stripped of the energy to feel awkward in front of a stranger. "I'm tired." Michael nodded. "No philosophy, no advice. I hope he heals quickly." Her lips pressed, tears slipping free too fast to catch. But when she'd cried, her mouth bent upward a little, like a smile being retraced from memory. She walked on the flower, bobbing against the black coat like a small life preserver. An hour later, a boy led his little sister past. She was crying, clutching a doll with a broken leg. Michael held out a blue flower to the boy. He didn't take it. Michael crouched to eye level and offered the flower to the doll. "For her pain," he said. The girl fell quiet, eyes still wet but wide, and took the bloom, setting it on the doll's leg. Children's sadness is a summer shower. It comes fast, it goes fast. The siblings ran off, leaving a thin laughter trailing in the air like a suspended note. Around noon, a man in shirt sleeves stopped at the basket, leather watch strap cracked at the edges. He smelled faintly of oil and grease factory, most likely. "Where's the old man?" he asked, blunt. "The hospital," Michael said. "I'm sitting in." The man stood silent a beat, gripping the basket rim as if steadying himself on something familiar. "He gave me a flower when my wife left," he said, voice rough without being sharp. "I hated flowers. That day I didn't." Michael handed him a long blade of grass with a small wild bloom. "Carry it. No need to keep it. Toss it when it feels lighter. Or give it on." The man shoved the stem into his pocket like a utility knife. "I'll stick it on the dash," he said. No promises, no excess thanks, and moved on. The wind added another layer of cold, tugging the mechanic's door tarp until it clapped. Michael pulled out his notebook and scribbled a few short lines each time someone took a flower, not for accounting, but to remember a woman in black with a pharmacy bag, a little girl with a broken-legged doll, a man who smelled of oil. Each one a small dot on the day's map connected by a thread too fine to see. By mid-afternoon, Jenny brought a steaming cocoa and set it on the step. "You're doing good," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. "I had a couple at the cafe about to throw a chair." Before she launched it, the wife looked out and saw, "You hand a flower to a granny." She shut up and told her husband, "Let's just go home." Jenny arched an eyebrow. "You can't save a marriage, but you might save a chair." Michael laughed and took a sip. The warmth slid down like a hand finding the sore spot. "I'll stop at the hospital again before dark," he said. "Bring a bloom," Jenny said. "Not for him, he doesn't need it, but for the night shift nurse." By evening, only 3 flowers remained, 1 daisy, 2 blues. Michael folded the chair, lifted the basket, and left a scribbled note on the step at the hospital. "Back soon. M." He hurried up the slope into the hospital lobby, that mix of antiseptic and clean linens that both reassures and makes you want to leave. The nurse on duty was a young woman with her hair pinned up, a pale ring of fatigue under her eyes. At the desk, Michael set a blue flower down. "This won't cure anything," he said, "but it might remind someone that what you're doing matters." She laughed. "The day's first laugh, maybe. Thank you." "And the other one, for the old man in 12. Michael lifted the last daisy. "He likes this color." Eli was awake. His dim eyes eased when he saw the daisy in his hand. "You remember," he said. "Daisies for cold days. There's 1 blue left," Michael said. "I don't yet know who it's for." "Keep it," Eli murmured. "Tomorrow, it will find its person." They didn't talk long. The monitor's blips held time steady like a veteran drummer who never drags. Michael shared a few street small stories, the broken doll, the almost thrown chair, the man who smelled of oil. Eli listened, laugh lines gathering at his eyes. "You keep a notebook?" he asked. "I do," Michael said, showing it. Eli touched a fingertip to the paper. "Writing keeps seeds dry through the rainy season," he said like an old secret. At the door, Michael turned back. "Eli, I'm not afraid of smiling the way I was," Michael said, almost whispering. "But I still feel guilty sometimes." Eli nodded, not arguing. Guilt is a bell that keeps ringing. Let it ring until it turns into rhythm. That night, back in his room, Michael set the last blue flower in the glass where the spent daisy had been. The soft blue breathed under the desk lamp's yellow. He wrote longer than usual. Today I handed out flowers. No miracles. Only faces changing very slightly. But slight is still change. I see why Eli sat the chair for years. When you give one away, you begin to believe in a story larger than yourself. He set down the pen and looked at the blue bloom. In his mind, Emily sat beside him, saying nothing, only nodding. For the first time, the memory of her didn't pull him into an abyss. It laid a warm hand on his shoulder. Keep going. I'm behind you. The next morning, Michael took the basket out early. The snow had melted in places, exposing brown-black seams like spilled ink. A stranger stopped by the basket. Expensive coat, small suitcase, a taut gaze with the wary look of someone passing through. I'm just passing by, he said. I'm not sad, but I'm empty. Michael hesitated a beat, then handed him last night's blue flower. For journeys without a map, he said. The man took it and studied the bloom as if reading a new name. If anyone asks, he said, I'll say this town has a folding chair and a flower basket. And an old church, Michael added, and a warm cafe. The man smiled, turning away. Next came the elderly woman with the cane who had passed many times without stopping. This time she stopped. Which flower is for someone who lives alone? She asked, straight to the point. Any flower if you put it where you'll see it, Michael said, choosing a small white wildflower, the kind few notice. This one isn't flashy, but it doesn't die quickly. She squinted, then nodded, slipping it into a lace-edged cloth bag. Doesn't die quickly, she repeated as if testing a spell. She walked off slower but steadier. At noon, Michael cut across to the cemetery. A fine skin of snow lay over the stones, turning names into raised threads. He crouched at Emily's marker and set down a blade of grass, not a flower. Grass is tough, takes cold, and stays green even when it looks bad. I gave 3 blooms away, he said softly. Yesterday and today. Not to forget you, but to take you with me. The wind slid through cold but no longer cruel. He stood and headed back. At the familiar corner, the folding chair was waiting. He sat, set the basket on his knees, and realized he had learned to sit like Eli, no hunting for drama, no bargaining for thanks, just ready. That readiness strangely filled part of the hollow he'd thought nothing could fill. By late afternoon, Jenny stepped out with a hastily scribbled sign, donations for Eli medical costs. She pinned it to a utility pole and placed a dented tin box below. Passers-by slipped in small bills, small but heavy in the hand. Michael looked from the box to the basket. Some things people give in money, some in color. Both matter. The guitar teenager returned. He stood before the basket awkward, then pulled a worn plastic pick from his pocket and dropped it into the donation tin. It's not worth much, he said, but it'll play better in his box. He lifted his eyes. I found a place to play tonight at a little bar. Not much money, but people clapped. Michael held out a small white bloom. For your last song, he said. The boy grinned, no longer shivering with cold. The last song is always the hardest. The sun slid down, leaving a thin orange seam at the edge of the day. Michael folded the chair and lifted the basket, looking up and down the street. No fireworks, no crowd, just eyes, a shade changed, footsteps a little lighter, and a tin box heavier than in the morning. He headed back to Jenny's place, hung the basket on a hook by the counter, rolled up his sleeves, and took the evening shift. In the reflection of the stove glass, his silhouette overlapped with the shadows of passers-by, an ordinary figure doing ordinary things, but with a heart tapping out a different beat. That night, before lights out, he got a brief call from the hospital. Mr. Eli is stable under observation. Michael sat a long time, the room warmer for a piece of news, no bigger than a pinhead. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Today the flower was passed on, not only in another's hand, but in mine. When the hand opens a door and the chest opens with it." He laid down the pen and blew out the lamp. Outside the window, the snow had melted into slick black lines that glittered under the yellow streetlights. Somewhere in a white hospital room, Eli was likely asleep. Somewhere in an apartment that smelled of oil, a man was tucking a blade of grass onto his dashboard. Somewhere, a broken-legged doll held a blue flower, like an apology forgiven. And here, in a red-brick rented room, Michael's heart was no longer a stone, but a small sprout, not strong yet, but surely pushing up through the soil. The snow slowly melted after the storm, revealing roads blotched with mud. It was as if the whole town had undergone a harsh cleansing. Rooftops, missing shingles, signboards dangling loose. But the air was clearer. The sunlight after so many days of gloom felt thin and precious. Michael walked along the main street with the flower basket in hand, sensing that the town itself was also drawing a long breath after holding it too long. News of Eli spread quickly. People whispered in the cafe, at the auto shop, on their porches. The old flower man's in the hospital. Not sure if he'll make it this time. Everyone knew, though. Few said it out loud. The worry hung like mist light, but lingering. Michael visited the hospital every evening. Eli drifted in and out of consciousness. Some days he was lucid, telling Michael stories of young soldiers in Iraq, his voice steady as though reading from an old book. Other days he tossed in delirium, hands fumbling at the air, as if searching for his missing basket of flowers. The nurse said his heart disease was chronic. The storm had only weakened it further. He needs rest, less emotion, she advised. Michael nodded, but he knew Eli had never lived by resting, only by giving. Something strange happened. Ever since Eli went to the hospital, more and more people came to the folding chair and the flower basket. At first, just a few, then a slow stream: the old woman who'd taken a flower last week, the boy with the guitar, the man smelling of oil, even the quarreling couple who'd nearly broken chairs at the cafe. They asked Michael, "Any flowers today?" Michael found himself becoming the bridge. He went gathering with Jenny and the neighborhood kids. Each person dropped in a stem, a bloom, a sprig of grass. The town was poor, the flowers poorer, but the basket was never empty. Some days it was filled only with greenery, and that was enough. "Grass is part of the garden too," Eli had once said, and now that line spread quietly through town like an unspoken motto. One evening in honey gold light, Michael sat by Eli's bed and placed a daisy in his hand. Eli opened his eyes, smiled faintly. "The flowers still know their way back to the street." "So do people," Michael said. "Not always." Eli whispered, his breath thin as smoke. "I've traveled farther than I thought, but I don't regret it." Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to shout that Eli must live, must sit the old chair again, but looking into his eyes, calm and free of resentment, he understood some journeys no one can stop. "Listen, Michael," Eli said softly. "A life is finite, but what we give is not. I've held the basket too long. Time to hand it on." He squeezed Michael's hand, not hard, just enough to pass on a weight invisible. Michael's eyes burned. "I can't replace you." "No one replaces anyone," Eli answered. "You only continue. The only difference is whose hand it is." That night, Eli left. The nurse called Michael at midnight. He went in his sleep, very peaceful. Michael rushed over, arriving in time to see Eli's face still as stone, lips curved as if he'd left a story half told. On the bedside table lay the daisy Michael had given him, still fresh. Michael sat until dawn. He didn't wail. The tears came quietly, steady. He recalled Eli's words, "Flowers fall so that people bend down." And now he bowed his head for a long time, unafraid at last of the emptiness inside. A week later, the old church held a memorial. No elaborate rituals. Townsfolk brought wildflowers, yellow daisies, purple blooms, green sprigs. The altar overflowed in untidy color, and the very disorder made it beautiful. Jenny read a short passage. He wasn't a priest or a doctor or a hero. He was just an old man with a basket of flowers. But somehow, we all remember him as the one who reminded us of gentleness. Michael stood at the back, clutching the basket. When his turn came, he placed it on the table, his voice trembling. "He once told me, every flower is a breath. Today I give back the basket so this town can have many more breaths." The people nodded. A child ran up, dropping in a dandelion picked by the porch. Then another and another. The basket didn't stay empty long. After the service, Michael carried the basket back to the familiar corner. He unfolded the chair, set down the basket, and sat. This time he didn't feel lost. A little girl approached, took a flower, and whispered, "For my mom, she's sad." Michael nodded, and as he watched her run off, he realized he was smiling, not with guilt anymore, but with gratitude. Eli's legacy wasn't wealth, nor books, but the habit of giving. A legacy immeasurable, spreading hand to hand. That night, Michael wrote in his journal, "He is gone, but the flowers remain." And whenever someone bends to take one, Eli is present again. He closed the book and sat quietly by the window. Outside, the town was still poor, still dusty, still loud with trucks. Yet right on the pavement, a tiny flower had pushed through a crack in the cement, stubbornly lifting its head toward the sky. Michael gazed at it and whispered, "Your legacy, Eli." Spring arrived slowly, as if the town itself hesitated to change. The last patches of snow melted, exposing damp brown soil and shy shoots of green. The smell of wet earth mingled with a hint of warmth on the breeze, and even the roar of trucks on the highway seemed softer, padded with a gentler undertone. Michael sat on the familiar folding chair, the basket of flowers by his feet, watching the main street remain quiet. But within him, another movement had begun, the urge to step beyond the loop he'd been circling, to find a new path. One morning, as Michael handed a flower to the paper girl, a middle-aged man stopped. He wore a leather jacket, carried a small suitcase, more a passerby than a townsman. Accepting a blue bloom from Michael, he turned it in the light and asked, "Ever thought of leaving? You're good at sitting in this chair, but maybe somewhere else needs you too." Michael froze. The words pierced like a pin through the thin skin of denial he'd wrapped around himself. He forced a half smile. "I'm only filling in for someone." The man shook his head. "You're not replacing anyone. You've begun your own story. Don't let it die here." When his figure vanished beyond the intersection, the echo of those words lingered like church bells after their strike. That night, Michael opened the old wooden box under his bed. Inside were enrollment papers, a few textbooks, and a photograph of Emily beaming as she held her college acceptance letter. They had once dreamed of a big city, a bookstore cafe, a life among lights and voices. All of it had shattered in the crash, but turning the photo now, Michael realized the dream had never died. It had only been buried, waiting for someone brave enough to dig it up. He wrote in his journal, "If I leave, I take the basket with me. I'll give flowers elsewhere. That won't betray Eli. It won't betray Emily. It will be how I carry them along." A week later, Michael stood before the old church, setting the basket neatly beneath the small altar. Jenny was there, the neighborhood kids, even the old mechanic. He drew a deep breath and spoke simply, "I'm leaving town, but the basket stays. Whoever wants to sit the chair, let it be yours. The flowers will grow. You'll know where to find them." Jenny stepped forward, hugging him tight. "You deserve more than this corner, Michael, but don't forget to come back." He nodded. Inside, he felt both sorrow and release. The town had been where he lost everything, but also where he found himself again. Now it was time to move forward. The bus carrying him away rumbled onto the highway. Through the window, the rusted water tower receded, the wooden houses shrank, until the whole town was just a fading dot. Michael touched the pocket where he'd tucked a small daisy picked that morning, not to cling to memory, but to remind himself that even new journeys need gentle breaths. On the bus, a boy beside him sobbed, lost from his parents. Michael leaned down, holding out the daisy. "Take it. It'll help you stay calm." The child's tears stopped at once, eyes shining. Minutes later, his mother arrived, clutching him tight. Michael turned back to the window, but warmth swelled in his chest. He realized he had already begun giving flowers on a different road. As the bus neared the city, skyscrapers rose, lights flickered, horns blared, voices hurried, a vast current of life. Michael felt both overwhelmed and exhilarated. This was the place he and Emily had dreamed of, though now he stepped into it alone. He didn't rush to open a bookstore cafe. He began smaller, sitting in Park's basket by his side, handing flowers to the weary after long days. Some people stared, some smiled, some refused, but sometimes a light flickered in someone's eyes, and that was enough. He wrote in his notebook, "I'm no longer only the man who lost Emily. I'm no longer just grief. I'm the one who gives flowers, and with each flower I keep them here with me." The city was vast, but Michael didn't fear getting lost. He believed anywhere someone would need a flower, a small reminder they weren't invisible. His new path wasn't paved, no signs pointed the way. It was drawn by each step, each bloom. One evening, as the sun painted the sky gold, Michael sat by the river with an empty basket. He watched the water flow like time itself slipping past. In the cool wind, he whispered, "Eli, Emily, I'm not leaving you behind. I'm carrying you with me through every street, every hand." Then he closed his eyes, letting the breeze carry the words he had never spoken aloud. The city in early summer blazed with brightness, streets crowded and echoing with car horns and hurried footsteps. Amid the chaos, Michael sat in a corner of the park, the flower basket set before him. Today it held only yellow daisies and soft violet blooms, simple, unpretentious. He had been sitting here for weeks, and people were beginning to grow accustomed to his presence. A young man calm-faced, handing out flowers to anyone who needed one. Some people smiled, some wept, some merely accepted a bloom in silence before moving on. Yet all left a trace not in the basket, but in Michael's heart. He realized he wasn't only giving, he was also receiving a glance, a whispered word, a lighter breath. And in that recognition, he understood Eli's legacy did not end in a small town. It had traveled far. One evening back in his modest rented room on the city's outskirts, Michael opened his old notebook. Between the thick scribbled pages lay a folded sheet of paper he had never noticed before. The handwriting was shaky, but clear Eli's. "Michael, if you are reading this, it means I no longer sit in the chair. Do not grieve. I've had more days than I ever asked for. The only thing I want you to remember is this: flowers are only beautiful when given away. Don't keep them in the dark, and don't keep your heart in the dark. If you laugh, then Sarah, Daniel, and Emily will laugh with you. I believe that." Michael sat still, tears falling onto the page. He pictured Eli on the folding chair basket before him, smiling with quiet peace. And he knew this was the final message Eli had left for him. The next morning, Michael carried his basket to the park. He chose the brightest daisy, lifted it to his chest, then placed it gently in the hands of a boy sitting alone, face clouded with sorrow. "This flower," Michael said, "is not for remembering. It's for beginning." The boy looked up, his eyes slowly lighting. In them, Michael saw a reflection of his younger self, a soul afraid, broken, yet still capable of holding on. Back home, Michael gazed at the mirror. His face hadn't changed much. The same deep eyes, the same early lines etched by sleepless nights. But something was different. The light in his eyes was no longer extinguished. His heart, after all these years, was no longer only a wound. It had become soil, where flowers of memory and hope could grow together. He wrote the last line in his journal: "Eli left the basket. Emily left the love. Both live within me, and I will go on giving flowers, giving smiles, giving my heart, because the most beautiful legacy is not what we keep, but what we leave in others." Michael set down his pen, closed the notebook, and blew out the lamp. On the windowsill, a yellow daisy in a glass cup tilted slightly, as if nodding in farewell. Outside, the city roared on, but in Michael's heart, there was a stillness, a place where flowers would always bloom, no matter how many storms came.